thing is to adopt the agenda. And the resolution reads that the agenda for the November 10th, 2020 meeting of the Communal Services Governance Operation Model Review Committee be adopted. So, Wayne moves, Gwen seconds. Any questions on the agenda? Having seen none, I'll call the vote. All in favor?
Yes.
Thanks, Fran. Oh,
You're
and
welcome.
is Mike on as well?
I am. I guess I should have spoke
there
rather
you
than
are.
raise my hand.
You're in the shadows up there, Mike.
Sorry.
Oh, there, that's a little brighter. Yeah. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
So the next one is, does anybody have any pecuniary interest to declare this morning in the nature thereof? Having
No.
seen none and none, I can't see Fran's picture, but she said no, and Mike's okay. Good, we'll record that and move on. The adoption of the minutes. The minutes of meeting held September 23rd, 2020. That the minutes of the Communal Services Governance Operation Model Review Committee meeting held September 23rd, 2020 be adopted. And Jim is going to move it, and Ron seconds. Any questions on the minutes? I did have a follow-up. It may come up during the presentation, but I was wondering when the CAOs would be contacted by WSP for their input in meeting. So
I can give you a quick response if you'd like. We actually had a meeting with the CAOs and treasurers and planners. I don't know, I'm going to say 2 weeks ago, maybe, something like that. So that meeting has happened now.
Okay. I understood from my CAO that it didn't, but I'll follow up again on that. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, I'll ask for the vote. All in favor of adopting those minutes?
Yes.
And Fran, and Mike's hands up. Good. We'll move on. And the presentation, Alec is going to go through the presentation, which I think everybody has on their computer.
Great. Yeah, so good morning, everyone. I'm happy to start anytime. Is now the time to start, or are there other things we need to cover first here?
No, the floor is yours, Alec.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to be here and talk about this. We've made some pretty good progress over the last, I don't know, 6 weeks or so since we all got together. So the goal for today is just to go through basically where we're at. We are basically done our interviewing of other municipalities. We've done some background research and sort of question and answer with the Ministry of Environment on MRAs, municipal responsibility agreements, done some of our own internal and desktop research. And so this is really a summary of where we are today and what the next steps are, and getting a bit of feedback from you guys. Any questions before we've got a PowerPoint, obviously, that we're going to go through. Any immediate questions before we do that?
None in this room, Alec. Any, Fran or Mike? Any?
None from me.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on.
Great. And I should add, anyone from WSP or anyone who wants to ask questions, feel free to pipe up at any time if you want to add things in or discuss a certain point or a finding. Again, very, very flexible and informal. So just, speak up anytime. Okay, so give me 1 second. I'm going to try to share my screen here. If I can get Zoom to... Okay, let me know if you guys can see my screen.
We can.
Okay,
thank you.
Very good. Okay, so agenda for today, as I said, summary of our progress to date. We'll tell you a little bit about what we found from the MRA questions and reading that we've completed. go through the best practice engagement that we've held with municipalities around the province. We've set up some sort of preliminary governance options. Our original schedule and list of tasks indicated that we'd be starting to summarize governance options, towards the end of the project. But one of the thoughts we had along the way here, having gone through all these other best practice reviews and interviews, whatever, was that it would be a good idea to give you guys a sneak preview of what we've heard, not just what we've heard, but what we think that means in your context and where we see things going, so that if you agree or disagree or want to change direction a bit, there's still time in the project for us to shift a little bit. And then the last thing we'll talk about are some next steps. Okay, so progress summary, work completed to date. As I mentioned, we have done a bit of investigation and communicated with the Ministry of Environment to understand some of the questions that we had surrounding MRAs, including some questions that came up on the CAO and Treasurer and Planner call. There was 2 or 3 questions we had, I think some out of South Frontenac, and there might have been 1 or 2 others. And so we've gone through and clarified those with the ministry. As I said, a best practice review, both sort of internally and through desktop research, as well as interviewing. I think we've interviewed 5 municipalities now around the province. We had aimed for 3 to 5. We've done 5. There's actually 1 other one we've been hoping to do, but we have been struggling a little bit to schedule it with that municipality.
Lost you, Alec.
We've actually heard very good feedback.
Now we see you, Alec.
Okay, sorry. How long did I lose you guys for there?
I think you were on the scheduling of the final. Yeah.
Okay, so only for a few seconds. Okay, so basically schedule, I would say we're basically on schedule here. This meeting that we're having today is maybe a week or so later than we had hoped, but the actual technical work is proceeding apace. So I think we're doing just fine that way. In terms of meetings held, then we've had the kickoff, we had the municipal staff meeting, and then today is the governance committee meeting. Number 1, we'll probably have a second one sometime before Christmas. I would say, in another month's time or so would be the appropriate time. Any questions on that progress summary before we keep going here? Okay. Hearing none. So what we're going to do for the rest of the presentation is basically a summary of what we've learned about municipal responsibility agreements in brief, and then most of our time is focused on what we've heard from other municipalities, our own sort of experience and research bundled all into a summary of findings and preliminary, not recommendations, but sort of preliminary direction that we think we're going. Okay. So with respect to municipal responsibility agreements, some of the questions that came up with the CAOs, the municipal staff call, were around the current MRA legislation or structure says that a municipal responsibility agreement has to be between a municipality and what is effectively a single entity, like a corporation, like a business, I should say, or like an apartment building which is owned by one property manager, or a vacation property which is owned by a private corporation, but not as much on or not really for condo corps or things like that which have joint ownership. So one of the questions we had from South Frontenac was around, is that going to change? Is there any way to make that change? Is that maybe an upcoming change in the legislation, 2 to 3 years down the line or something like that we can plan for? Because I think there is interest there in trying to make it so that that kind of agreement could be held with a sort of freehold property condo corporation. And the answer is basically no. The ministry really wants to have one single entity that they can ensure the municipality is negotiating with, rather than having it be a decentralized series of 100 people all have to agree to pay their bills every month in order for the money to, or the system to keep operating properly. So that was one of the big pieces, and we'll get into those in a minute or two a little bit more. But apart from that, largely what we heard from the ministry is that they really want to get the municipality to buy in, and they are flexible with how municipal responsibility agreements are structured, as long as they think due diligence has been taken, and that there's an appropriate mechanism there to cover the risks, basically. So
Alec, we have a question.
sure.
Ron? Yep. Okay, Ron Vanderwall, I guess that last line you just said is kind of a mixed message. You're saying that MRAs are not going to be done, they basically want them held by municipalities, but they're looking at sort of different options to spread that. I guess one of our concerns was also, like, if we do a seniors housing and it's run by a corporation, not by us. I know at the end of the day, usually the municipality is responsible, but can the MRA go with that corporation, or does it still have to sit with the municipality?
No. So that should be fine. Yeah. So the way the municipal responsibility agreement will work is that it has to be the municipality or a municipal entity, whether it's a joint board or a corporation within the municipality, whatever, but the municipality has to be one of two partners on the MRA always, and the other partner has to be the sort of single entity, like a single corporate entity, as opposed to, which I know kind of a condo corp is, but really at the end of the day, a condo corp is then sort of owned by a series of people. So in the case of a seniors housing project, I don't think it would be a problem if there is a single, like Smith Developments or Smith, Rivera or something owns that seniors home. That's fine, because that is a single corporate entity making decisions, so they can make sure that the system is being maintained, etc. But what the ministry really wants to avoid is any kind of condo corp arrangement or sort of collective agreement whereby everyone has to pay their bills every month. And if out of the 100 houses, if Joe and Sally stop paying their bills, well, then others in the condo corp say, well, now we either have to pay more than our fair share, which maybe we don't feel like we can afford or is unfair, or this thing isn't going to be maintained properly. And that's what they want to avoid, is that decentralized decision making where 100 different people all have to agree to do the right thing in order for appropriate funding to be paid in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And so what I was trying to get at, and maybe I wasn't doing a very good job of it, one of our other points here, the fact that municipalities can waive or lessen assurance requirements, that's really around, as I say, MRAs, the Ministry of Environment will basically consider them on a case-by-case basis, and they will consider an MRA even if the municipality says something like, we've decided to waive our financial assurance requirements, we don't require anything from the developer, or we only require a reduced amount, whatever. The Ministry of Environment will listen to that and negotiate with that, as long as there's an appropriate plan in place. So if Frontenac County as a whole, let's say, drums up $10 million and sticks it in a bank account and says, this is our financial assurance, we've set it aside, then at that point, if you have an appropriate amount of money there, let's say, then you would probably be able to convince the Ministry of Environment, we're going to build this development, but we do not require any financial assurance or financial holdback from the developer, because we've already got this money set aside for it. And they will listen to that. So it's really, as I say, it's not, what we were told is it's really not a set of hard and fast rules around how much money do you set aside and in what context and who owns the money, and is it surety bonding, is it a sort of letter guarantee of funding, is it actual cash? They don't really care, so long as they feel like you have done your due diligence and you guys understand that if if the developer walks away or the system falls apart, that comes back to you, and you have an appropriate mechanism there to deal with that. And it does not go to the Ministry of Environment. That's what they want. So I think that's actually a good finding from your point of view, because it means there's actually quite a bit of flexibility in how you deal with this, as long as you do your due diligence. So that's the summary on MRA context overall. One of the important points here is that again, basically your financial assurance component is negotiable, but it's the entity you negotiate with is the environmental permissions branch. So any MRA that you want to set up would basically go through the environmental permissions branch at the Ministry of Environment, and they would be the body to decide on a sort of case-by-case basis how to approach things. One thing we did talk about specifically or ask about was portfolio risk. So this idea of, if we have many systems set up, we know they're not all going to fail in a single year. So sort of like the idea of car insurance or whatever, we can reduce the amount of money we set aside by pooling all of these assets into a single single entity or a single pool. And they said, again, they would be open to approving it as long as there's a reasonable approach to handling that risk. One other thing they mentioned, so an MRA, I think, if I understand correctly, it's a necessary part of an environmental compliance approval, which is to say, before you build a new development, the Ministry of Environment has to say, yes, we approve of this development from an environmental point of view, and that covers many things, one of which would be water, wastewater, and one of which would be, if needed, a municipal responsibility agreement. One thing they did tell us is that more recently, municipalities or jurisdictions have been moving to a concept of sort of collective environmental compliance approvals. So rather than having a specific approval for every development or every project that goes ahead, the idea is that you'd have more of like a sort of blanket ECA that covers all of your developments. And every time you have a new development, you'd basically say, look, we're going to fit within that current set of guidelines that we're following. Or if things are going to be a little bit different, you'd say it's going to follow the basic agreement with this one little minor adjustment here. And then you'd probably have to submit, if there are drawings required or whatever on a per property basis, you'd probably have to do those as well. But the basic idea is that you won't have to apply for environmental compliance approvals every step of the way. You could set up a sort of blanket agreement that would cover all of your communal systems if you have the intent of structuring them and building them in the same way, so that they do have the same standards and they do follow the same general layout or approach to however you meet these environmental regulations. Does that make sense? Again, I think it just makes your lives easier, because it means you can approach this as a collective and do a series of projects under one framework of Ministry of Environment regulation, rather than having to do these one-off applications and then stick to that specific bundle of regulations or requirements that particular property has signed up for today. And I think it means you'll have more flexibility over time to make sure that everything is sort of on the same page, but with slight room for variation.
Alec, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Jim has a question.
Sure.
Alex, is there any requirement for a municipal responsibility agreement if the municipality owns the system?
No. So if the municipality owns it, then an MRA doesn't, it wouldn't mean anything, but certainly don't need one, because you guys are the owner. So it's only for if it's a third party owner, and it's just there so that third party owner, that corporation, cannot, Rivera, the retirement home corporation, they can't just walk away and say, yeah, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to maintain the system. But if you guys own it, you guys own it. So the responsibility is with you anyway. if that makes sense. Well, actually, there was another question that we had from one of the townships during the staff call we had a couple of weeks ago around this, and it was with respect to what type of municipal entity can enter into an MRA, which is to say, does it have to be the municipality itself, or can it be a municipal services corporation? Can it be a joint board? Some extension of the municipality? And the answer is basically yes, it can be those other things. What the ministry is looking for is a municipal entity that cannot just sprout legs and walk away. And something like a joint board is not the kind of thing you just, one day it exists and the next day it doesn't exist and nobody knows what it is. It doesn't sneak off into the night. There's legislation, there's all these agreements in place. You can't just abandon it spur of the moment. So I think what that means is, regardless of the governance structure that is decided on for moving forwards here, that entity can almost certainly have the authority to enter into a municipal responsibility agreement with corporations as needed.
Alex, would it be common for the municipalities to eventually take ownership of these systems, even if they have an MRA, or for the MRA to include a provision whereby after a certain length of operating experience that the municipality takes over the system?
Yeah, so that is something that we did hear when we spoke with a couple of the municipalities that we interviewed. At least one or two of them have done that in the past, whereby basically they, a private entity, a developer goes and builds a communal system, and then I'm trying to think of what it was. I think the way actually it worked, it's a bit different from what we originally thought. Jim, but it's not so different. Basically, what happens is, at least in their cases, the municipality takes immediate ownership of the system, but they don't take responsibility for operations or maintenance until 2 or 3 years have passed, or until a certain number of units are sold or whatever. Basically, until the system's up and running, the municipality doesn't take over the operations and maintenance, but they do take ownership on day one, I think was how it worked. Salah, can you remember? I remember Oromodonte said something took quite a while, like getting permissions or something from the Ministry of Environment, even though ownership happened immediately. The O&M took a while, those permits to shift over, or it was vice versa or something. Do you remember which way it was? I think it was that ownership came immediately though.
If I recall correctly, I think it's vice versa, where the municipality took the role of the operations side, but we can double check and get back on that.
Okay. They took that immediately, and then the ownership came a couple of years down the line, because that was what took time, I think. Okay, yeah. That was Oromodonte, but then the other one, which was it Union maybe, or no, not Union, the South Huron one. I think they said that they took ownership immediately, but they still expected the developer to pay for operations maintenance for the first couple of years, basically.
Yeah. That's right.
Wayne has a question in the room.
Alex,
Sure.
I might be ahead of myself, but can you just walk through a little bit of an example that I'll sort of lay out? Let's assume it's a brand new plan of subdivision and we would want to put a communal system in. Can you just walk that through in context of where we're talking right now? Like, who are the parties? Like, there's going to be a developer and there's the municipality and there's maybe our whatever governance format we have. Can you walk that through, who the parties would be in that particular case?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I think you're basically right. There is, to my knowledge, there isn't a lot of other parties that necessarily need to be there. Basically, the developer would build a system and the municipality would give its approvals, its development approvals to build a system. But depending on how you set up your governance, it could be that the municipality, say there's no joint agreement and every township in the county does its own thing, then the individual township then could enter into a municipal responsibility agreement with the developer, if the developer was going to be the sort of property owner and manager, or there could be a third party. So maybe the developer builds a system, but again, maybe it's Rivera who buys the senior's home. So they would then be the owner, and then the municipality would have this municipal responsibility agreement with that owner, and that could be it. And then Rivera could pay to own and operate and maintain their own system. Or it could be that the developer builds the brand new subdivision, and it's planned to be, generic freehold residential. So a condo corporation is set up. Ownership of the system then would probably then transfer from the developer to the township, the municipality. And then the township would own that system. Whether the township then does it internally, if they come up with a municipal services corporation, if it's done at the county level, that's all the debate we're having right now. But really, that's, I think, all it comes down to is you have your municipal entity, you have your developer, and then you might have a corporate owner, or you might not. Or you'd have a condo board, but the condo board seemingly will not be the owner of that asset. They will simply pay a monthly fee or a monthly rate to whoever owns that system. So in this case, it would be you, the municipality, and that's it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
We have a question from Ron.
Okay.
I have two comments, but the one is, I know when we started this process, the biggest fear for municipalities was the liability. But at the end of the day, no matter what we've said in all the meetings, it's still going to be the liability to the municipality. They can set up the agreement with a private person. They can do all of that. But at the end of the day, if it falls through, municipality has to be one of those partners. That's correct, right? So you're shaking your head yes. I assume that's right. Okay. And the other part was, when you're saying here that the the flexibility for the environmental compliance approval was going to be generic, is that going to be generic as far as county-wise? But each application could have a totally different environmental circumstance. Well, not all of them would, but obviously if you're close to water or lake shore development or all of these things, they would have definitely a different compliance, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they would. So I don't know enough about this, and to be honest, this is getting a little bit sort of beyond where our real scope of our investigation is for this project. But I think you're right. I think what would probably happen is it would be more a sort of package of standards, or a package of guidelines that you follow. So it might be something like, if the communal system is built, first of all, maybe if it's a wastewater communal system, it's this. If it's a water, drinking water communal system, here's your set of regulations and approvals. And maybe one of them is, if we're pulling water from the lake, here's how it works. And one of them is, if you're pulling water from a well, like an aquifer or whatever, here's how it works. So you'd probably have a package, and each of the systems would sort of subscribe to that. And then, in as much as you get a new system which is unlike all the rest, you'd probably file a minor update, as you maybe notice in the last bullet point here on the screen. Basically, you file a minor update saying, oh, we've got this little tweak, and now we're pulling from it's not a lake and it's not an aquifer, it's something else that Alec doesn't know much about from a water point of view. But it's,
yes, I should keep my questions to financial. That's what we're trying to do.
To that then broader. No, it's okay. But basically, yeah, I mean, it's more the idea that you come up with a template type agreement that you then either stick to or you slightly amend as you go. And it just means that you don't have to do individual one-off things and get them all approved under slightly different conditions every single time. It's like you come up with a master agreement and you basically stick to it. So it should make your lives a bit easier, I think.
Mr. Chairman,
any other questions before we...
Mike, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So I've had the chance to be involved with a handful of MRAs, and I appreciate what Ron was saying. Like there's one of the major roadblocks is the fact that at the end of the day, the financial responsibility comes back to the municipality. So I've done a handful of things to try to make these work. Condo agreements quite common. But what I'm curious about is, there's a couple things, and I think you're going to explore this, is the fact that these systems are pretty stable and failure isn't common. So it's not really a scary factor, and these systems come with warranties and all the rest, and as long as they have maintenance agreements, they'll last as long as a regular municipal system. So my question is, could you have a line item on your tax roll where if you're part of one of these systems, you're paying into that long-term money that's going toward repair and maintenance, same way you would do a condo. So rather than giving the municipality $500,000 on day one, that's usually what kills the project in my experience. You pay $600,000 to build a system, and then the municipality wants $600,000 as part of the responsibility agreement, and the project dies. So condo has saved that by building it into fees and everything else. But could you do the same type of thing through just your regular tax roll, where you have enough assurance that the system isn't going to fail for, you're not even at maintenance until 10 years, let's say. So is that something that's legal?
Good question, but yes, I admit that I'm not a lawyer. I haven't looked into the legality of everything personally, but it sounds like from the Ministry of Environment, they will, at the end of the day, it's the approval from them that you need. And it sounds like they will approve your solution as long as you say, here's how we've planned for it, here's how we account for failure, etc. And that's exactly what you've just described is pretty much exactly what our financial model does that we've set up for you. It does assume a big chunk of money is set aside up front because as you say, it's a low likelihood of failure and all of that. But if it's a single system you're talking about, there is a chance it'll fail, and there's a chance it'll fail in year 1 or 2 before you've had time to make up that pot of money from your tax or your, whether you do it as a tax administered to the community or whether you do it just as part of user fees, whatever, doesn't really matter. It could even be a general tax across the county if you decide to go that way. But the point is that really you do want money there available as of day one in case it fails on day one. Otherwise, you're taking the risk of, well, what if it fails on day one, but we don't think we're going to get the money until year 10 or 15? Well, then we're in trouble. And so that's the kind of trouble you're trying to avoid. And the Ministry of Environment wants to see that you're not getting into that kind of trouble. But there's lots of ways you can do that, as I say, and again, the ministry sounds like they will be open to that. You can ask for the financial assurance up front from the developer. One thing we heard from one of the other municipalities that we interviewed is that they don't actually ask for cash, they ask for a credit letter, which basically says the developer has to stuff the money in a bank account, and the bank guarantees that that money is available if needed, which isn't all that different from the idea of handing the cash over, but at least it means that the cash is always in the developer's name, so maybe they feel a little more secure about it. It can also sit there and generate interest in the meantime, so yeah, they have to park the money aside, but at least they get the benefit of keeping the money in a bank account. There is a third option, which is surety bonding, which we did also learn a little bit about, and we can get into that. But anyway, all of those things can be done, and then the final option is, as I say, you guys as a county can just park money. If you're willing to borrow, say, $1 million up front, especially right now with historically low interest rates, you can borrow that money, stick that in the bank account. That can be your financial assurance. Your developers could pay nothing or only a little bit of financial assurance if you want. And as you say, we've already structured the financial model such that the users of the system will pay back that financial assurance over time. So at the end of the sort of 10 or 20 or whatever 30-year lifespan you've got, that money's now been paid back. So you can actually sort of pay off the bank, whatever you've loaned up front, as well as cover the interest charges in the meantime, as well as then have money like build up your reserve fund so that you now have that financial assurance. and that can sort of fund the next project, basically. You've now got your financial assurance pot sitting there, and that one can fund the next one, and so on and so forth. And it'll have to grow over time. But basically, it's getting that pool of money started, I think, is the difficult part for you guys. And the answer is yes, if you're willing to borrow it and pay the low interest rates on it, you can have your users pay to cover those interest rates along the way, and as well as actually pay back to cover the capital as well.
Does everybody see the note from Kelly? He says the Municipal Act allows you to area rate a tax for municipal purposes, such as streetlights, fire, service, utilities, etc.
Okay, there you go. So whether it's, as I say, whether it's a tax or a user, part of the user rate or fee, doesn't really matter. That's actually one of the other things. Maybe that's not a bad segue to start getting into our findings from the best practice review, because we do touch on some of those sorts of things. Unless there are any other
Alex,
questions. Yeah.
Just before we leave this, could I request that you, in your final report, you include a discussion on having a municipal-owned system and an agreement in place to protect the municipality with the developer, as opposed to an MRA? It's just another means of obtaining the same goal.
Can you say that again? Because I'm not sure I understand the distinction at the moment.
Well, I think if the municipality owns the system, then
Oh,
there's
sorry.
no need.
Sure.
There's no need for an MRA, but the municipality needs to be protected by some form of an agreement, which may be similar to the MRA, but would not necessarily have to be approved by MOE.
Well,
I don't know the exact answers to all those things, but I would like to see a discussion in the report that circles around that, because that may be an alternative that if we end up having a special board that looks after these systems, that board may want to own the system since they're liable for them anyway.
If I may, Alex?
Sure, yeah.
So, we sort of skirted around the opportunities here, but certainly under the Planning Act, if a developer were to build it, then the subdivision agreement would be a method of securing, both from a legal standpoint, but also through the provision of securities in one way, shape, or form. So if this were a system that were not for a single entity like a Rivera, but say for 300 residential freehold homes of some sort, certainly the securities and the agreement could cover for that. And we can certainly discuss that a little bit more, I think, in the final product, because it is a fairly standard practice. And again, the municipality would be able to work those details out with whomever is front-ending the cost of this, and sort of the handoff provisions, the assumption of ownership, and the responsibility for assurance can all be spelled out in a Planning Act agreement.
Thank you. It's Dennis, and I have a comment based on what Jim just said, and that is, I would think the developer would be anxious to pass over the ownership to the municipality. And I wonder, when you're doing your write-up, if you could say some of the benefits for the developer for doing that. I think the sticky point would be, how many years will they guarantee it? Will it be 6 months, a year, or 3 years, or whatever? And I think that would probably become the negotiation point.
I agree with that, Dennis, very much. I think that is going to be the sticking point, and it'll probably be on a case-by-case basis in terms of how badly the developer wants to build this development and all of that kind of thing. So that's probably something that, again, is a future stage of work. Maybe it's not a bad idea early on for you guys to come up with a standard, here's what we expect from everyone. It's, 3 years or until X% full or whatever. Come up with the terms so it's clear and unambiguous and the same across the county. And then every developer knows if they want to build one, this is going to be the way it goes, basically. But yeah, I think that'll be the negotiation point, is that those early years. Okay, so
sorry, Ron has a question, but does everybody see Kelly's note there? He talks about the loan is a valid option, but you can also use a line of credit to guarantee it.
Yeah, whichever, a loan, a line of credit, however, exactly. Yeah, that kind of thing.
The other comment I was going to make, though, is you can have the agreement with the developer all you want, but still, at the end of the day, if he walks away after year one, it's still the municipality.
Correct. Yep, that's exactly
matter
it. Yes. Once the municipality owns it, it's your system. And if the developer walks away, I mean, you guys own it and you'll have very little recourse. If it's an MRA with not a developer, but again, a Rivera or whoever, you know, fine, it's not your system, but you have the MRA. And if they walk away, it's now your problem to deal with. So either way, it's, you know, it's, the buck stops with the municipality, and that is what the Ministry of Environment is work. MRAs are there to make that part very clear.
Just one point on that. You're absolutely right. If the developer walks away, it's on the municipality, no question. The subdivision agreement would have provisions for how long you would be keeping those securities. So if the developer walked away while you were still in, say, the warranty period, you would maintain those securities so that you're not left holding the bag. So
Correct.
If it was a $300,000 project and you felt that the warranty period were 2 years or 3 years, or a performance standard was set, you would hold on to that $300,000 or a number that you felt comfortable with, so that if, should there come an unfortunate circumstance where a developer goes under or walks away, you have the funding that you felt you needed to guarantee that, and so that the taxpayers or the ratepayers or the user fee payers are not left holding the bag. Whatever that number is, and whatever that number you feel comfortable with, you should take that and hold on to it until you are ready and you have confidence in the system. And so it could be a year, it could be 2 years, or performance met. So just to say that you're not, while it's true they can walk away anytime, there are mechanisms to protect the municipality.
True, but
Yeah.
you also, the part of this, trying to set this up is so that you can actually create some incentives that the developer can afford to start it too. So you have to be careful what that number is. If that number is too low and the municipality takes too much responsibility up front, it's easier for the developer to default. So, but you also don't want a developer to put $1 million there, because then you won't get any development either. So that's a catch-22 a bit.
That is exactly the balance that you guys are going to have to strike. And basically it'll come down to how badly do you want these things to happen, I think. We did have we heard from one of the municipalities we interviewed, they had a case in prior years where they had held back money from the developer, and whoever it was, you know, a year or two down the line, someone was doing maintenance or whatever, found out there were some basically problems. The thing hadn't been installed correctly, this, that, whatever. And they found that it was going to cost more, or the contractor did their own assessment and figured out it was going to cost more to fix than they had money set aside. So they just walked away and said, yeah, keep the financial assurance. That's it. Your problem now. And the municipality ended up being out about $300,000 because that was, you know, they had to spend $300,000 over and above the financial assurance to get the thing where it needed to be. So that is the risk with you guys taking on more of that liability, whether it's through a line of credit or borrowing money up front or whatever, is that it makes it easier for the developer to just walk away. And that's why I say it just comes down to how badly you guys want this to happen and how much of an incentive you need to provide to developers to make it happen. Because as you say, if it's too punitive, they just won't enter into an agreement. And if it's not punitive enough, unless you're lucky, sooner or later you'll pay for it. So
okay, Alan, we're at page 5. I think we got about 15 more to go. So good
Agreed.
questions and discussions, but can we move on?
Agreed. Okay. So what we're going to go through now is I'll give you a quick overview of what we've done for the surveys and things like that, and then we'll go through the different surveys that we did with the municipalities, and then try to cap things off with a bit of a summary here. So We had video calls basically with, as I said, 5 different municipalities. We'll go through them one by one. We had started with a list of about 18 that we identified through a combination of you guys coming up with ideas and us coming up with ideas. And we whittled it down to 5 plus 1 backup. And we're going to try to do that one backup anyway, just because I think it would be an interesting one. We focused on relatively rural municipalities. We tried to find relevant ones in terms of size or scope or services provided. We asked them about the services they provide, their governance, how they set up their board, how long they've been operating, how they communicate with the public or internally, all that kind of stuff. And we ended up hearing from municipalities which between them, there was 1 or 2 municipal services corporations. There was a sort of utility. There was a buyer-seller model in one case where one municipality effectively sells to a neighboring municipality. There is 1 or 2 joint local boards, some of which were provincially mandated in about 1997 when the province was trying to download responsibility onto municipalities. And then there were 1 or 2 joint local boards that were sort of elective. They had chosen as a region to enter into an agreement. So we got a pretty good spread of different governance structures, and I'll start jumping into them here. So the first municipality we interviewed was Oromodonte. For anyone who doesn't know, Oromodonte is sort of, if I'm remembering correctly, just sort of east of Barrie, sort of in and around Barrie. So it's a single lower tier municipality. So it's analogous to a single one of your townships. They have created a municipal services corporation, fully owned by the municipality. It's still early in its establishment phase, but it's being done because they had a few communal wastewater systems, as well as one communal drinking water system, which was some were being sort of managed by the cities, some were being provided by a private corporation. It was a bit of a mixed bag of how the agreements all work and what the structure was like. And so they've been operating it at the municipal level for many years, but just recently they've decided to move to a municipal services corporation. And they've done that for a few reasons. Before I get into that, one point I'll make here is that there's a distinction between a municipal services corporation and the term utility as I'll use it. And you'll see that as we get into one of the next slides here. A municipal services corporation is what it sounds like. It is a corporate entity owned by 1 or more municipalities. It cannot, by law, be owned by any private entities. It has to be owned by public entities. So, you could have several municipalities all be shareholders in a single municipal services corporation. That's fine, but you cannot sell your shares to Amazon or Joe Public or anybody else like that. It has to be a municipal entity who owns it. A utility, on the other hand, can be privately owned. We'll get into that in a minute. So in the case of Oromodonte, they've decided to go with the Municipal Services Corporation for a couple of reasons. One, to streamline governance. So they've got all these different systems which were all being managed ad hoc. This is creating a single entity who will try to get all the systems under one umbrella, take care of billing, take care of communication, a single point of communication, a single director, a single sort of standard moving forwards. It also, by moving to a municipal service corporation, allows self-financing, which is to say the corporation can borrow its own money. So the municipality no longer needs to borrow money to fund water and wastewater projects if it doesn't want to, because that corporation can do it. And the corporation, I believe, actually has higher borrowing capacity than the municipality. It's something like $100 million instead of 50 million for the municipality. So there's increased access to funding if needed, but it can also be separated from the municipality. So it means the municipality can focus their borrowing for roads or streetlights or other services and have this separate entity be borrowing on behalf of water and wastewater as needed. One of the other considerations from their point of view is to try to separate politics from provision of the service. That was probably the single most resounding thing we heard through every one of our interviews, was the importance of trying to take politics out of the decision making, but also not just aspiring to that from a notional point of view, but taking concrete action to make it happen. And you'll see one or two examples along the way here of where that hasn't happened and it hasn't been very successful as a result. So with that in mind, their board that they're in the middle of setting up is 5 to 7 members, of which only 1 or 2 are councillors. The remainder are basically technical people, whether they're people with financial experience, engineering experience, legal experience, whatever. They are not politicians and they are not on council. And so in theory, they are not making decisions for political reasons. They're making decisions that are good for the Municipal Services Corporation. The way recruitment works for the board at Oromodonte is that the CAO goes and identifies potential board members that the CAO thinks would be appropriate, and then sends those board members to council, basically for council to vet or to select or whatnot. Staff is sort of shared with the town. So particularly as the corporation is starting, it's going to be small. It's going to have something like 10 employees, which makes it difficult for it to have its own IT department, its own HR, its own finance, whatever. And so because it's a corporation, it is sort of fully independent in the sense that it can't do things like say, oh, can I just borrow your HR team for a couple of weeks every quarter? Borrowing, like that kind of informal borrowing, doesn't work and doesn't exist. So basically they hire the town's IT and HR and finance professionals on a part-time basis. So maybe it's 5 hours a week or whatever, but effectively they come up with an hourly rate and they reimburse the municipality for those services. But the nice thing about that is it means you get access to the town's services, but you don't have to hire people full time. It also means that obviously it's sort of synced up with the way the town does its IT and its HR and everything, but you don't have to bear that full cost within the corporation. Communication wise, I believe basically all the boards or all the municipalities we spoke with said the board is at least supposed to communicate quarterly with shareholders or with the town, whoever it is. If it's not a corporation, then they're not shareholders, you know what I mean? But basically there's a director, the director will present to the board will make decisions and they have latitude to make decisions up to something like $3 million or $5 million of financial decision making. Beyond that, it goes to council and there's a vote. And so there's sort of quarterly meetings. They can have special meetings as needed, but otherwise there's quarterly meetings where the corporation says, here's how we're performing this year. Here are the plans moving forwards. Can you vote to approve or not approve the following big decisions, and that kind of thing. And the corporation is run as effectively it's not for profit. So it's not making money. It's not returning dividends. It's just covering its costs. And the municipality, the Municipal Services Corporation, does its own billing. So it sends bills to customers. It has a sort of standardized rate structure, and if customers have complaints or problems, they go straight to the corporation. They don't complain to the town. They will just complain straight to the corporation. Any questions on that one before I skip to the next city?
Yes, Alec, you talk about recovering the costs, but is there some money set aside in reserves for replacement in that cost?
Yeah. So yeah, the corporation will set aside money into its own reserve fund effectively to pay for expected maintenance, expected eventual capital replacements and all of that, as well as a rainy day fund for, something went wrong, we weren't expecting whatever. So
Thank
that
you.
the rates
Ron
are
has a
inclusive.
question here.
In
Or a comment.
the Oromodonte presentation, you say 5 to 7 members of technical and keep politics out of it, which I agree. But then it says 1 or 2 counselors. They have to be a counselor. So you can't, I don't care if they're in there, but when you said 1 or 2 counselors that aren't actually counselors, well, they have to be a counselor. If you're on council, you're a counselor. If you're not, you're not. So I don't have a problem with them not being there. I think the less political, the better. And I do agree with the setup that the director present to a board. The board, ultimately, council has a say at the end because we're still responsible. But I agree that if it's 1 or 2 counselors, it is a counselor. There's no
Sure,
other
and
way.
perhaps I misspoke there. What I was trying to say is that most of the members are technical. They are not counselors, but 1 or 2 are counselors. They are certainly city councilors. They sit on council. They vote the way any other councillor would. They just happen to be on the board. And I don't think that's a necessity of a municipal services corporation. That's just the way these guys decided to go, was a small but real presence of councillors on the board. Yeah. Okay, shall I jump to the next one here? And then we'll have a summary of these. And
Just a second, Alec. Jim's got a question.
Sure, let me go back up here. Okay.
Alex, just that municipal service board, it could take over existing operating facilities. As an example here, South Frontenac has a water system in Sydenham. So if this system was set up, it could take that over if that was the desired outcome.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And we'll see an example of that. In fact, basically moving to the next slide here. The next entity we communicated with was Lakeland Holding. So Lakeland Holding is a utility. We've called it a private utility provider here, and it's actually a holding company. So there's 3 subsidiary companies within that. There's Lakeland Energy. I'm trying to remember now. It's like Lakeland Energy, Lakeland Power, and then somebody Generation, I think. But I can't remember off the top of my head, but that part isn't critical. The key part here is that it is what we've called a private utility, but it's actually owned 100% by its municipal, the municipalities that it serves. So it serves 6 different municipalities, a combination of lower tier and single tier municipalities. So it isn't even within a single county or anything like that. Includes Bracebridge and Perry Sound, and I think maybe Huntsville and a couple of others sort of in that area, in Muskoka area. But so what does it mean that it's a private utility? As I say, 100% of the shares are owned right now by the municipalities who are in that area. But if they so chose, those municipalities could sell their shares off to whoever, to Joe Public or to a company that wants to invest in infrastructure, whatever. They could sell it to Enbridge or something like that if they want to. So that's the key distinction here. One of the most important things to note is that the primary service they provide is power. They generate and do transmission of power. They also do fiber optic, and they've started to offer 1 or 2 other little sort of subsidiary or small services, but it's not their main thing. But the key thing is that they don't do water or wastewater, which, as we'll I think see later, those have to be publicly owned. So I think the idea of a private utility won't work particularly well for Frontenac, because you won't be able to, it would not be allowed to sell off ownership of those shares to an individual or a private entity. In which case, basically, if you tried to set up a private utility, it would effectively be the same thing, I think, as a municipal services corporation.
Alec, it's Dennis. On that, I did hear somebody on CBC radio this morning, Professor David McDonald from Queen's University just finished a big paper on water systems in Canada. And he concluded that municipalities must always own water systems, at least. Other things, like Ron mentioned, a senior's home or apartment, maybe you can sell those off, because you should never think of selling off your shares in a corporation that has a water system responsibility. Are you
Exactly.
familiar with his work?
I'm not, but that's exactly the finding that we heard and the conclusion that we came to as well. Yeah. So I'll take a look at that. I'll look them up after this, but yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think there's lots that we can still learn from Lakeland Holding, but I think the idea of a private utility is probably not going to be the way forward for Frontenac. What I did find interesting about Lakeland was that they have an independent board for each of their 3 holding companies, though the board is composed in many cases of the same people for each, but they're all sort of sectioned off into their own pieces to make sure that each is making its own financial decisions and is sort of sustainable financially. The corporation is actually for profit, so they return a dividend every year, but that dividend goes back to the municipalities, and the municipalities are quite happy with it. Basically, when Lakeland started, it was a smaller number of municipalities, and Perry Sound in particular said, no, we're not interested. You're just trying to take away our assets, blah, blah, blah. At least according to Lakeland, this was their approach. And about a decade later, they said, we're struggling to pay for to maintain or replace or expand our infrastructure. Can we discuss options to have you guys take over ownership? And so they did. Basically what happens, and Jim, this goes back to your point, and I think it would be the same for a municipal services corporation, when an entity joins later on and brings assets with them, basically you do a valuation of those assets and issue shares on a proportional basis, saying, in your case, oh, Sydenham's joining in, or not Sydenham, but you know what I mean. They're bringing this existing asset. That asset is valued at $10 million. Okay, here are shares to the tune of $10 million as a percentage of the total corporation, and that's how you deal with that sort of existing infrastructure format. One of the important things, so they have 0 counselors on their board here, so it's entirely technical, and they say that has been very successful, and they've been commercially very successful. They say they've sort of kept rates at a reasonable rate. The municipalities love it and sort of actually rely on the dividend they get every year from the corporation, and they're starting to expand into other services because of how successful they've been. They have their own in-house staff for IT and HR and finance, etc. When they started, they only had about 20 employees, and so they didn't have enough. Basically, they couldn't afford full-time services, so they just hired part-time. But now that they're big enough, they have their own in-house services, and they're sort of fully independent, I suppose. And similarly, they communicate directly with customers, and then they have quarterly shareholder meetings. One important point here is that because there are 6 municipalities who are involved, the 6 municipalities are the shareholders. Obviously, they have to vote on big decisions. But Bracebridge, the municipality of Bracebridge, owns something like 55% of all shares. Which obviously is a bit of a trick in the sense that it means whichever way Bracebridge votes, on a raw voting basis, everything goes according to how Bracebridge votes, and the other municipalities would be irrelevant. And so what they've done to deal with that is any voting decision from councils has to be Bracebridge plus at least one other municipality. So that way Bracebridge can't just do things that are bad for every other municipality. But it also respects the fact that Bracebridge is the primary owner, so they don't need to have all 6 vote in favor, since Bracebridge is the primary shareholder. And so I think that's something worth keeping in mind as we move forwards for you guys, because I suspect South Frontenac will be in a similar position. If I'm not mistaken, South Frontenac has, 65 or 70% of the total population of Frontenac County. So if communal systems spring up, according to, in keeping with population, let's say, of each of your 4 townships, we would expect the majority of systems and the majority, I guess, of value, and therefore shares or votes or whatever you want to call it would be in Frontenac, and so or in South Frontenac. And so to have to give equal votes to each municipality might ruffle South Frontenac's feathers, but to give South Frontenac the majority of all votes might ruffle everyone else's feathers. So there will need to be some in between compromise that gets things moving. Any other questions before I jump to the next municipality here? Okay, hearing none. The next was Grand Bend. So it's a sewage board. The Grand Bend Area Joint Sewage Board is a combination of, or made up of lower tier municipalities, but across several counties. They chose to form a joint sewage board, so it was not mandated by the province. Lambton Shores is the administering municipality, so effectively it's the main plant. I think they have one, I think it's just one main plant, which is providing the water treatment, and I believe it's located in Lambton. So they are sort of the administering municipality. They do have an internal dispute resolution mechanism in place. The way they've done it at the moment is it's only South Huron and Lambton that are part of the board right now. But when it was created with an option to add the municipality of Blue Water at a later date. So they have already in place a structure for how that municipality would be entered in, how many votes they would get, all of that. That's all sort of set out in place if Blue Water decides that they want to buy in. Effectively, because it's sewage, effectively they just each takes a share of the capacity of that system. So maybe it's, maybe South Huron right now uses 60% and Lambton uses 40. And if it comes to a point where one of them needs more capacity because that share isn't giving them enough, they can either build their own independent system, that's fine. They could ask the other municipality if they have extra capacity that they're not using, they can buy that from them. Or they could pay to sort of upgrade the plant or otherwise do something to increase the capacity, but then they would continue to own that share of the capacity. There are three, there are, how many is it? Yeah, 3 board members per municipality, regardless of capacity. So it's, 3 for South Huron, 3 for Lambton. And if Blue Water were to join, they would also get 3. Even though the capacity amounts would be quite different, they've decided to go with an equal split of voting, basically. And so far, they've had no concerns with that. It is.
And Alec, I guess the municipality decides if they're councillors or members of the public or a combination thereof. Any rules set around that?
It's a good question. The council, I think, does decide that. I think they are councillors. I think because it is a board, a joint board, I think they are councillors. They've decided by definition, but that's a detail I can look into. We have a long list of notes that we can provide as part of the report. So I'll double check that one. One thing they did say, so again, this is set up on a cost recovery basis, so there's no profit here. And each municipality can actually charge its own customers whatever it wants, and they each do their own sort of distribution, or I guess in the case of wastewater, collection. So they can come up with their own rate structures, they can come up with their own prices. The distribution component they pay, or the collection component they pay themselves, all of their sewers and whatever, but then the actual plant capacity they sort of share those costs evenly. One thing I was going to say is that they have it set up right now with it 3 board members per municipality, but they've noted that if they were to start this again, they would probably approach it as one municipality owns the system and sells it to the others. They say that they haven't had political problems so far, but they've only been going for a few years, and they are anticipating that political problems are going to start arising. And in that case, it would be easier if they just had one entity owning and the other one purchasing, because it makes the decision making simpler. With that said, I can tell you from other municipalities we spoke with, and we're going to come to one shortly, that also has its drawbacks. In the sense that if one municipality owns it and everyone else purchases from it, that one municipality can, in a sense, do what they want to do, and the surrounding municipalities don't necessarily have a choice. And in my experience, not only on doing research for this project, but in my previous experience doing work for other municipalities who purchase water or wastewater services from their neighbors, it can create a lot of distrust or bad blood if one municipality thinks that the other one is trying to fleece them, regardless of whether or not it's true. If there's a perception that that's the case, then it's everyone closes up. Nobody wants to share their ledgers and books, and it just becomes anyway, it's these guys have decided that they should have gone the other way, but part of me wonders if they would be saying exactly the opposite if they had started in the other situation, if you know what I mean. Any questions on that one before we skip to the next system here?
I don't see any. Do we want to take a 5-minute break? It looks like we're halfway through and we've got probably another hour or so to go.
Yep, we can take a 5-minute break.
So 5 minutes and
Sure.
we'll be back. Thank you.
Okay.
You can't hear me? Okay, Alec, can you hear me? Alec, we're ready to go.
Sounds good. Yep, I can hear you guys. Is everybody else?
Okay,
back?
we're all back in the room, and hopefully Mike and Fran are on. And some members have indicated at break they have to leave somewhere around 11, so maybe
Okay.
we can keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll try to be a bit quick here. Okay, very good. Maybe we'll jump on to the next. Oh, I'm probably not sharing my screen anymore, am I? Let me see if I can get it back here. Okay, can you guys see my screen again here?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so jumping on to our next one, which was, it's a joint board between Edwardsburg Cardinal and Prescott. Michael, if you're around, I'm happy, of course, to go through this, but I thought as someone who has some personal knowledge of this, maybe I'd turn the slide over to you if you're interested, or I can talk through it and you can add in some tidbits after, as your preference.
So feel free to go over it, Alex, and I can give you any personal insight on this one for members of council. I was the CAO at one of those municipalities where I think I encountered Michael Keane there while I was there at one point in time as well. But yeah, so I do have some inside knowledge. So if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to assist and provide some insight.
Okay, sure. So, so I'll give a quick overview then. Edwardsburg Cardinal and Prescott are between them a lower tier and a single tier municipality. They have a joint board for administration of water and wastewater, but that was mandated by the province, as I said, in the late 90s, and has been difficult to change and is difficult to change, though I believe not impossible. The board is set up such that there is 4 seats for Prescott and 1 for Edwardsburg Cardinal. All of those seats on the board are filled by municipal councillors. That is not mandated by the province, but that is the way the municipalities decided to go. But it took them, they just said, close to about 14 years to come to some real agreement about how things would work. Basically, there's been political disagreement, I think, along the way from day one. And so the board hasn't really functioned the way it's intended to. Communication is a perfect example. In theory, they should be having quarterly meetings with the board presenting back to the municipalities. They said they've been having more like 1 or 2 meetings per year because there isn't much to present when you don't really agree on decisions or make many decisions. So it's been a real struggle for them. It is a joint board, so in theory it's joint decision making, but Prescott is the larger municipality. It's using more of the services, or maybe it's not specifically it's the size of the municipality, but of the service that is shared between them. Prescott uses most of that and pays for most of that service. So they have 4 of the 5 seats on the board. And because it's just the 2 municipalities, effectively that means whatever Prescott votes to do or wants to do happens. So even though it's technically a joint board, it's really operating as a sort of buyer-seller model whereby Edwardsburg Cardinal gets, they get what they get, and the decisions are really made by Prescott. And I think that has been a point of contention, probably partly because it's supposed to be a joint board, but also just because it's a provincially mandated solution, which sort of obliges them to effectively buy their services from Prescott. So communication has not been great. Decision making has not been great. Progress or change has been minimal. Both, Michael, maybe you know more and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe both municipalities have separate water and wastewater services which do not fall under this agreement. So this is specifically a joint board for services that are sort of on the border of the 2 municipalities. So it means that both municipalities need to maintain their own separate water and wastewater staff and processes and treatment facilities and whatever. So this doesn't encompass everything, it's just a portion, but it's been a I think the long and the short of it is it's been a real struggle for them. And maybe Michael, I'll turn it over there to you if you have any other tidbits you can think to add that I've missed here.
Yeah, so as Alec said, the municipalities weren't really given a choice on the structure. This came by a provincial order when, as Alex noted, certain services were transferred downward to the local municipalities. And really the biggest problem has been that the two municipalities have not been the greatest of neighbors with one another. They don't really see eye to eye on a lot of things, and that has been a problem. And even with changes in council, that sort of culture has not gone away, and it has really was the slowdown in getting anywhere with this board and getting it up and operational. And it essentially was dormant for the better part of a decade and then some. And so it's not really that much better. My experience with it is that it is what it is because it has to be, and it would be very difficult, I think, to change things given it's attached to a provincial order. But I think there are a few takeaways from it in the sense of I think what we can see here is the lack of balance in terms of how they operate, the lack of communication will help inform some of the recommendations we make for you about how to avoid getting into these traps and pitfalls. So I think if anything, the takeaways may be more on the negative in this case, but they are helpful to guide us towards something that doesn't fall into that type of a scenario. So,
Yeah, thank you. It sounds like a shotgun marriage, and maybe there's some things we take away what not to do, but
yes,
we can move
yes,
on to
exactly.
slide 11.
That's right. Okay. And any questions on that before we jump into the final municipal summary here?
Questions here?
Okay. Okay, very good. Then I'll jump to the final municipality that we've spoken with. It's the Union Water Supply System, Southwestern Ontario. So there are 4 lower tier municipalities who are part of the system: Leamington, Kingsville, Essex, and Lakeshore. They're all within a single county, but they are not all of the lower tiers within that county. There are 7. And so basically they're a subset of the county. It's a municipally owned system for treatment and transmittal of water, but at a sort of wholesale level. So again, there's centralized facilities for water treatment, but then distribution of that water is done locally by each municipality. But the central treatment facilities are sort of owned by the joint board or managed by the joint board. There are 13 board representatives, and that allocation is determined as a function of consumption. So effectively, that's your sort of voting structure is based on municipality size, or again, not the size necessarily of the population of the municipality, but the percentage of the fees or services that are used by each municipality. So what is interesting here, I think, as a comparison for Edwardsburg Cardinal is that these guys, I believe, and Salah, maybe you can correct me if I'm misremembering, I believe these guys were also set up as a joint board under a provincial mandate in the late 90s, but they are moving away from that. Is that correct, or was that the other?
Yeah. No, that is correct.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So I don't know specifically what they've done to find a way out of it, but they are moving out of the provincially mandated joint board. They went through a fairly lengthy review process to do, not unlike what we are doing right now, figure out what should our governance structure be and why. And so they looked at a few different things. They looked at having one municipality own and operate the service and effectively sell it to others. That was pretty quickly decided it would not be viable because there would be political discontent with one entity owning everything and calling all the shots. They talked about having a joint municipal board. So not unlike what they have now, except that it wouldn't be provincially mandated and it wouldn't be set up in the way that was mandated by the province. It was decided that was not the preferred option because the joint municipal board would have the sort of power or the need to borrow in the name of municipalities. And there was concern from some of the municipalities that if the board decided to borrow money, it would effectively be forcing the municipality to just hand over a bunch of money, even if that municipality's council didn't agree. If they were outvoted on the board, they would be sort of financially responsible for whatever decisions were made there. So they didn't like the idea of a joint municipal board. They considered county ownership, but this was also tossed out the window for two reasons. One, because there's only 4 municipalities who are part of this system, but there are actually 7 municipalities in the county. They thought, I think partly it would be weird for the county to administer it since not all the municipalities are participating. But also number 2, because the municipalities are rather large, they don't, I think they, compared to Frontenac anyway, they're large. I think the smallest municipality is itself 25 or 30,000 people. And so I think they felt like they didn't need, there was less of a need to have that sort of higher structure when they could afford things like their own IT or HR, things like that. They just sort of felt like they had most of their own services. And again, they own their own distribution systems, things like that. So they felt like they didn't need to turn over ownership of all these existing assets, whatever, to the county level, since they were already basically big enough. They looked at a private utility, but of course that was not viable because it's water services, and those have to be publicly owned. So where they landed with, I think, having done all this research, I think they landed where they expected to land, which was a municipal services corporation, because it removes their political limitations in terms of any disagreements around financing. It allows self-financing. They said one of the keys for them is that it facilitates a technical board. So again, it is not just staffed by councillors, but primarily technical people, or exclusively, to be determined since they're in the process of setting it up. But it remains publicly owned. So those were the sort of selling points for them as a municipal services corporation. Before I move on to our summary of findings and our sort of next steps here, any questions on Union water supply?
None in the room. Any on the screen? No. We can move on.
Okay, great. Okay, so then the summary here, what we've tried to do is pull out some of the tidbits that we've heard and from our own experience and synthesize them into a few basic lessons here. One, a joint municipal services board has the potential to be hindered by political sensitivities, by voting inequities, or board member allocations. Municipal services corporations retain public ownership. It allows self-financing. It tends to reduce political setbacks, but it also has startup costs. And that was one concern I know for Oromodonte, was that by the time you hire a director and you hire some of these other services, there are startup costs that don't necessarily apply if the services are provided within the municipalities or through a joint board. Private utility, not an option because we're talking about water, wastewater services. A board with freedom to adjust and improve over time is generally seen as positive. So not a structure that is set in stone, but something that can sort of build or grow and evolve, particularly when you're starting out. That's what we found from the Lambton case, where they set up their joint board a few years ago, but they've already started to question, how do we grow and change our structure moving forwards? Technical expertise on the board was seen as a positive, but also not only important to have that technical expertise be available. So yeah, 2 lessons there. One is that it's great to have a board with technical people who know how to make good decisions with respect to the technical material at hand, but separately also to depoliticize the process by having it be technical people and not politicians, so that things are decided for for technical reasons, I suppose. Setup could be done, whether it's a joint board, I think, certainly if it's a municipal corporation, but even if it's a joint board, setup could be done to allow other municipalities to participate or join in, whether those are inside the county or outside. In a sense, I think it's simpler from a municipal services corporation point of view, because effectively then you just value assets that are being transferred in and issue shares accordingly, whereas a board might need to be restructured if you were to add in a municipality from outside the county.
Alec, we have a question here in the room. Gwen?
Just wondering if there is a limit or a scope of the number of municipalities that can come together to be a municipal service corporation?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I'm not aware of a limit. I do know that you can certainly have, several, there are examples of there being several municipalities within a single corporation, but I don't know if there's a provincially mandated limit. That's something we can look up. And so that's really it. That was really the summary of what we heard, the primary results from what we've heard in our own experience. Maybe I will jump ahead to our next couple of slides here. These are our last few slides. What we thought we'd do now is try to go through in a bit more detail what we think are the pluses and minuses of each of the different arrangements that we've gone through. I know we've sort of done that, but we've done it in the context of specific municipalities and their experience. But trying to pull that now back in line with our own research and our own experience, and to try to pull out the particulars of each municipality or get rid of the particulars of each municipality. A municipal services corporation, it's 100% publicly owned. It will have some kind of startup costs. And that's something that I think would have to be factored into the decision making. And one municipality did say that was some people were questioning, why are we doing this? If it has this startup cost, it's just going to cost us more. Why are we doing it? So that is a slight risk that you run. But it does separate politics from service provision. It could be relatively a pretty smooth launch for you guys, since you don't have an existing system in place. So you're, well, with the notwithstanding small assets, perhaps like Sydenham, but for the most part, you're not trying to take an existing system and contort it into this. You're starting from scratch. So I think that's great. Facilitates a technical board. Shareholder declarations can be used to limit the authority of the Municipal Services Corporation. So at the end of the day, as you say, the municipalities are still the owners. They still get to vote as shareholders on important issues. It is a system that is structured around its business or financial viability, which is to say, because it's its own corporation, it borrows money in its own name, it needs to be financially sustainable, or the entity will fall apart. So that's a really critical part of its mandate, is making sure that whatever it does, it is financially sustainable and viable. It can finance outside what municipalities can borrow. So it borrows and secures financing independently, which is one less headache for municipalities. And management can either be in-house if the corporation wants to hire directly. It could be third party if they just hire a third party entity, or they can contract people from the townships or Frontenac County or what have you. So that's a Municipal Services Corporation. Any questions before I jump on to the next structure?
One question. Wayne has a question.
Alex, so it's no different than any other corporation, except the shareholders have to be the municipalities. I mean, there's nothing you have said there that an ordinary corporation cannot or would be able to do.
I think that's basically right. There probably are some other limitations in if you read the Municipal Services Corporation Act or legislation, which we've been through but haven't read every word of it. But so there probably are some other smaller items along the way. But as you say, the big picture, it's not really any different from a corporation that happens to be owned by the public.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Ron.
Well, the Municipal Services Corporation doesn't really look a whole lot different from, let's say, a county level governance. Does the Municipal Service Corporation then would not have to report to any county or lower tier council?
It would have to report to them.
Okay.
Whether it's the townships or the county who are the shareholders, it's
Right
still
on.
like a corporation has shareholders that have to vote to approve big decisions. Yeah.
Just like the city of Kingston does with us with municipal water.
But for day-to-day stuff, the corporation can make its own, do we want to spend $20 here, $50 there? It just does it, and you guys don't have to worry about it, basically.
Good.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions on Municipal Services Corporation?
Seeing none, we can move on.
Okay. So the next one is a joint municipal board. So this would be made up of lower tier municipalities. So there'd be no direct involvement from the county, like Frontenac County as a whole. The municipalities can delegate their control, management, and authority to the board. So I think it is possible. We should double check this, but I think it's possible to appoint, as you were asking earlier, councillors or citizens or whoever to be your representatives from your municipality. I think were you guys to go this route, we would want to consider voting and how weighted voting would work, in the sense that, again, if you just have one councillor from each of the 4 townships, I mean, there's 2 issues there. One is that if you equally weight it, since you have an even number, you could get somewhat hamstrung at 2 votes. But even that aside, South Frontenac might not be thrilled as the large municipality to have only the same number of votes, particularly if, what if South Frontenac builds 3 communal systems and North Frontenac builds 0, then to have the same number of votes, might not go over well. On the other hand, if South Frontenac gets 3/4 of the vote, then the other municipalities say, well, why are we even here, since South Frontenac's making all the decisions? So you'd have to come to some agreement there on how that would work. It's not necessarily.
Ron's got a question.
Well,
Sure.
It's more or less a comment. The way county council is set up now, South Frontenac does not get a majority anyway.
Right.
So it's already set up that way, regardless of what ownership is.
Yep.
Secondly, if we're separating finances from the planning aspect, I think that changes a lot whether we would let the county manage it or manage a board like that or not. At least it definitely would make a difference to me.
Okay, I think that's something we'd have to talk about a little more, and I would have to learn more about the idea of separating the planning from the finance, because I don't know enough about how you do that. In my mind, they tend to be strongly interlinked, but we can talk more about that. So the joint municipal board would be created and guided by a municipal agreement. So basically everyone would have to sign on and come to some agreement and sign the dotted line. But of course that might take quite a while if there's disagreement about what that structure looks like. Or on the other hand, even if it's set up and everyone agrees up front, if it turns out in the first couple of years that it's not working for 1 or 2 of the municipalities, how do we change that? What does that mean? Could, as we found in some of the examples, it can be hindered by political disagreements. As we talked about, management can be internal or contracted externally. So in that sense, I don't think it's really any different. And it could be incorporated to mitigate risks, financial risks. I believe there's an option to incorporate a joint municipal board.
Alec, even if incorporated though, the municipalities are still ultimately responsible. So you couldn't just declare bankruptcy in that corporation and walk away from it.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
There would need to be very good wording on exiting and how, if a municipality opts out, what that means.
Correct. Yeah. And actually that's a very good point. And we didn't mention that on the Municipal Services Corporation side. Exiting there is selling your shares effectively. You're handing over your your ownership, which on the other hand would actually become, I think, and we'll get into that. Why don't I move to the next slide, and that'll bring me to my next point. Next slide. So I'm going to go ahead a slide and then come back. Single municipal service offering is probably an awkward way to do things. I understand how and why it makes sense for some municipalities, particularly, in the case of Ottawa selling water to the neighboring township of Russell. Russell is a small municipality. I can't remember how big, but let's say it's 20 or 30,000 people. Ottawa, is a monster. And so in that sense, it makes sense for Ottawa to just do a little bit more, clean a little bit more water and pipe some over to Russell, and that's a straightforward arrangement. But the way that works is that it's being done centrally, right? Water is cleaned and treated at one plant, and it's just piped elsewhere. In this case, because you guys are talking about specifically decentralized infrastructure, we're not talking about treating water in South Frontenac and sending it to Central Frontenac or something like that. We're talking about doing things on site. And so, at least to me, it would be a strange structure to have, let's say, South Frontenac own the whole system, like the whole, not necessarily corporate, but the whole structure for administering water, wastewater, communal services. Then let's say the islands, Wolf Island wants to build a water plant. It would be strange to me to have South Frontenac be the owner of that and then sell that water to the residents of Wolf Island, given that the infrastructure is physically located in, on Wolf Island. Like the permitting, the developments would then all have to be approved, I guess, by South Frontenac, since they would be the owner, but then I think it would be a very confusing structure. This tends to work when the physical infrastructure that's being used is located in the selling municipality, and they then just take that output of the service and send it to a pipe and say, okay, down when we cross the border, it goes into your pipes and you own all the infrastructure from there.
Alec, yes, I agree. Confusing, but also ultimately the islands would be responsible for it should there be any big issue. I don't know how legally it would force South Frontenac then to do something if they wanted to walk away from it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a bit of to me, this one's a bit of a stretch for you guys. On the other hand, there are a couple of benefits in the sense that if one municipality wants to build a lot of communal systems up front and others don't, it could take the lead, and then others could rely on that experience. Maybe Central Frontenac, I'm just making things up, maybe Central Frontenac doesn't build a communal system for a decade, and then in the meantime, they're saying, well, why are we part of this Municipal Services Corporation, or why are we part of this joint board if we don't do any of this stuff?
So Ron has a comment here in the room.
If you just for argument's sake, if you go to your last page there where the green, yellow, and red light are, and you talk about the simple municipal service offering, that is basically what we would be creating, though, if we went to a municipal service corporation run at the county level, which I don't have a problem with if we're talking the difference between financing and planning. Planning should be left up to the municipalities like it is now, generally. We all fairly closely have the same OPs. We have the same things, but I don't see a problem with creating a municipal service corporation to structure the financing, because we're all in on the financial level, and that would spread the risk to the county, and they can also finance it or borrow in case. We're all hoping for the best case scenario where not too many of these fail, obviously. So I don't see it that as long as we're separating the two, it basically would turn out to be a single municipal services or municipal service corporation anyway.
Yeah, so that is a very good point and good question. I think it's something I would like to think a little more about to understand how that would work. From the point of view of, if one of the townships says, we have a plan and we've planned to build a thing here, and then the Municipal Services Corporation says, the thing you're planning to build is not financially viable or something like that. Where does that lead? Does it just sit there and stagnate? So there would be I think questions like that, and I'd like to think a little bit more about how that would work, but maybe that's a good topic of discussion for our next governance meeting. Maybe that's something we can discuss again, because I think it's certainly an interesting idea, and I can certainly see where you're coming from, and that you don't just want to turn over full, run of the show to the corporation. The municipalities still want to maintain and have a hand in the planning, and I think that would certainly need to be the case. But what that structure is like is a good question.
If I could just add a point, I think, I'm sorry, I didn't hear which member of council raised that point, but it's a very good one. And there are examples in the province of two-tier systems working that way. And I'll just use the example I'm most familiar with. In the Ottawa area, prior to amalgamation, the water system was run by the regional government, but the planning for the growth component that relied on that water system, for the most part, rested with the lower tier municipalities. So they were involved in all of the planning level decisions. And of course, the standards of the region had to be met. So the line of division was once it was accepted by the region, it was owned and operated and maintained and planned for replacement by the region, but the lower tier municipalities played a role in planning for what happened leading up to that transfer over to the region. So I think it is something that could be explored a little further, I think.
Okay. I just want to jump back a slide. So we're almost done our slides, but I just want to go back a slide or two. There was one other option I wanted to summarize here before we cap off the day, and noticing that we're getting pretty close to 11. And the last option here would be county level governance. So basically it would be governed by county council. In a sense, I think there'd be a potential for smooth transition because county council already exists. So there's sort of an existing structure to fold it into. No need to incorporate because county is already incorporated. There's no need for setting up a special purpose local board or a joint local board. You'd get a single direction for service provision. So it wouldn't be, it would be coming from a single entity. It wouldn't be stalling in having necessarily hamstrung votes across a joint board. On the other hand, it won't necessarily represent specific the interests of specific individual municipalities because it's being done at the county level. Management could be contracted externally, or the county could add staff. You could consider weighted voting if I think you said your current structure is sort of two representatives from each of the 4 townships. If you wanted to weight voting, you could probably do that for the sake of communal systems. And there's also a long-standing existing model or history of sort of county level or regional level water and sewage delivery of services. So that's the sort of county level summary. Where we've landed then, for the sake of moving forwards, we based on our take on all of this so far, single municipal service offering, like a buyer seller model, probably not the best structure for you guys. A joint.
Alec, Kelly Pender has a quick comment to make. Could we just
of course
do that first?
Of course, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. One distinction between municipal service corporation and county level governance or joint municipal board is the ability to make a profit and return dividends to the municipalities. So within a municipal service corporation, you could, for example, add 2% to each bill that gets returned to the municipalities in the form of a dividend, or gets reinvested to, say, service the community of Inverary. Whereas under a municipal model, you're subject to the fees and charges provisions of the Municipal Act, and you can't make a profit to reinvest. So if the objective is to, for lack of a better word, create a profit that can be reinvested in communities, then the joint municipal board is the mechanism to do that. If you aren't interested in that kind of model, then the others accomplish that. Just want to make that distinction.
Sorry, can you say that last sentence again, Kelly? Were you saying, you just said in your last sentence, it's a joint municipal board that can charge that sort of profit margin, or was it the Municipal Services Corporation?
Municipal Service Corporation. So you could probably get around the fees and charges provisions, but you'd have to invent a way to do that. Whereas a Municipal Service Corporation can simply declare a dividend at the end of the year.
Yeah, great. No, it's a great point, and but also to say you don't have to, it doesn't have to operate as a for-profit model under Municipal Service Corporation. It's just an option. Yeah. Okay, great. So anyway, for moving forwards, our initial recommendation here is let's not pursue the single municipal ownership idea much further. I don't think it's going to be worth the time. Sort of potential for further investigation is the joint municipal board. Not that it couldn't work, it is being done elsewhere, but based on a lot of the challenges we saw with other municipalities, we're sort of a bit cautious about that one. From what we've heard and our own experience and what we've read, it looks like a municipal services corporation or county level governance is probably the way forward, in the sense that they are single structures. They're sort of less likely to be bogged down in political disagreements, and in a sense are a bit, better, very well able to provide services at the county level without as much risk for that political discontent back and forth. So that's really our summary of the work to date. Noting that we've got only about 4 minutes left, I did want to check with you guys to get your thoughts, whether you agree or disagree. What we found here, this is not because we have a preference. It really doesn't matter to us. What we want is a system that works for you guys, and maybe you guys perceive things that we don't, or there are considerations that are important to you that we've missed, and maybe that makes a municipal services corporation a terrible idea and a single municipal buyer-seller model a great idea. So I wanted to have at least a minute or two to see if you guys agree with this. What's on the screen right now.
Ron has a comment or a question.
Okay.
Well, I would like, although I don't see much difference between single municipal service offering, even though you say no way, or county level governance model under the Municipal Services Corporation. To me, the biggest distinction is if we're managing and spreading the risk of finances, I do not see an issue with the county. The planning part is totally different, because what would work in South Frontenac isn't necessarily maybe what Central or North would be looking at, those sorts of things. So I'm looking at this from the financial risk, the financial spread. And so whether you call it a municipal service corporation or a single municipal service offering through the county or whatever, I don't see much difference in that. And if you wanted, like you said, to explore it a little farther, that would be great. Or else I guess we would have to go with the Municipal Services Corporation.
I agree. I think we should look at both of the Municipal Services Corporation and the county level governance model. I think we need to get more specific details on those. I think they both look like a model that could work for us. I agree. I don't think the single municipal service offering is the way to go. And joint municipal boards can change every 4 years with the elections. So that can be just a nightmare for staff and for the operation of good business.
Thank you, Fran. Any other questions or comments? Wayne?
Yeah, I believe we really are looking at spreading the risk here, and I think either one of them might work. The beauty of the county system, it's already in place, but it's got some continuation problems or issues. And when you set up a corporation, if you put good governance in place, it has a long life, and it can have all kinds of input, but you have a structure that independently stands and has a life of its own. So anyway, that's what I have to add.
Great.
Very good, Wayne. Any other comments before we move along? Okay. Thanks very much, Alec. I think the next one was item 6. It says it's a report with more detail, but the report that I have in my package looks identical. Did other people notice that? I thought there was going to be more information in it, but any comment on that? We had two of what looked like exactly the same presentation, but the second one we thought was supposed to have more detail.
So a couple of things there. There are two versions of the presentation. They're quite similar. One has more detail written into the actual slides, but it made the slides a bit cluttered. So we went with a cleaner one for the sake of the PowerPoint today. We do have additional information. We had not planned to provide a sort of technical memo just for this section of the report. Our proposal was to have a single draft report and then a single final report with, we still, as I've noted here on the screen, the next steps, our next piece is to go back and look at the financial model a bit and do a couple of updates. Based on the RFP and our proposal. So, our intent was to do that and then to provide a single draft report that would include the MRA discussion, the best practices review, the financial model, all of that in a single draft report, and then a final report with a couple more presentations to you guys for feedback in the meantime. What we can provide, if it's of use, is a more detailed summary of our findings from speaking with municipalities, as well as the sort of benefits and disbenefits matrix of the different options. We can provide that. We're keeping it in Excel, so it's not a very polished form, but all the raw information is there. We can certainly provide that. And I think the next steps then for us are to take away what we've, I think, landed on as being the two most likely options and to flesh those out a little more, so that by the time you get the report, there's a little more certainty in the direction that we're moving here.
Thank you. And in the overall plan, you were at some point going to meet with the 4 municipalities, I think a joint meeting. Is there a approximate timing that you're thinking for that?
We don't have a time set. Our thought was to do that right at the end of the project, so sometime in sort of mid to late January. Basically, once you guys as a committee are happy with the way the research and the reporting, and basically everyone on the call today is in agreement with here's what we found and here are our next steps. The thought was to then present all of that to the municipalities as more of an FYI rather than looking for feedback and new direction.
Jim has a comment.
Sure.
Alex, is it possible for the next meeting, if we look at those two possible models, being a county run or a municipal service corporation, to provide a kind of a simple list of what the steps would be required to set up either of those? I mean, I know the county already exists, but there would probably be some specific requirements at the county level that need to do to set it up. And of course, there's a list of stuff you need to do to set up a new corporation.
For sure, and that's exactly right, Jim. That was where we wanted to slim the list down a little bit today so that we can go and do exactly that preparation, is to figure out what does that mean in each case. So yeah, I think that's exactly what we'll try to focus the next call on, is more information on those two, how we get there, so then we can get the next probably piece of decision making for you guys as to which way looks like the promising way to go.
And Ron has a comment.
Just a comment. I would lean towards supporting the Municipal Services Board, because I think at the end of the day, municipalities still do planning and all those things would fall outside of it anyway. So that would be generally where I would lean toward.
Okay. And what we can do actually for the next meeting, if it's of interest or value to you guys, is we can actually put together a couple of questions and do a poll through everyone's phone. Just take a poll on votes on, it doesn't have to be which option are we voting on as a single question, but it could be certain aspects or, scoring of, do you like this aspect or not, or what's most important to you, that kind of thing, as a way to solicit some feedback. So that's something we'll think about for the next meeting.
Thank you, Alec. Anything else before we move on to item 7 on the agenda? There's some communications. Are there any questions on that? Having seen none, and there's no other business, so I guess we're down to next meeting. Are we going to decide that today, or do you want to do some more work and go through Brianna to set the time?
Either works for us. If there's a time that works well for you guys, I think timeline wise, probably about a month from now, before Christmas would be my preferred approach. If there's a specific date between, you know, December, let's say 10th and 20th, that works for the committee, if you let us know, then we can make sure it fits into our calendars.
Okay, maybe we'll ask Brianna to do a doodle poll on that, because we don't have all members here today, so
Okay.
you pick a date, a few dates, and we can decide.
You guys went a bit quiet there. I don't know if
Did we lose everybody?
yeah, I'm not sure.
Alec, we're
that-
still here.
Okay.
We're gonna set a doodle poll and get more information. We just have other committee meetings, that same kind of area. So I will get back to you with that.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, so now we're down to adjournment. Would somebody like to move? Oh, Gwen and Wayne.
I would move that.
All in favor? And
Yes.
Fran, I think you're in favor. Mike, are you still with us?
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for attending. And thanks, Alec and your team for the excellent presentation.